So late last year, around the same time that news broke that between 2016 and 2021, 400 farms, small farms in New Brunswick, had closed, had ended production. That's equivalent to 18% of our farms in New Brunswick. At that same time, some dramatic aerial footage that was released uh, stirred what is known as the blueberry controversy of late 2023. I'm going to bring this to you today by way of illustration of how when there's a will, there's a way, especially with a majority government. Uh, what the aerial footage showed was that a massive blueberry farm, again, monoculture, a company that exists just to grow acres and acres, hectares, as we would say in Canada, of blueberries. There was a new part of the field, 18,000 hectares of blueberries growing in this former military firing range that the local community used for ATV trails and outdoor activities, hunting, that sort of thing. It was now completely filled with, of course, wild blueberries, but cultivated by the farm. When this was looked into, it was discovered that the government has allowed this giant Nova Scotia company cultivating, growing blueberries, blueberry producer, that's great for our province, great for our economy, to use and grow blueberries. Some kind of deal was made to allow them to use Crown land to expand their farm. This was Crown land. Okay, so around the same time that we're finding out we're losing farms, we're also finding out that the government is giving permission for huge monocultural companies like a blueberry farm to use Crown land. This is the kind of thing where, as we've saying, if we want to bring food prices down and if we want to support local farmers as COVID and inflation has exposed, I believe, our need for local farming production and getting local food to market. It's an example of the kind of thing where I don't believe, and as the MLA for Saint Croix, I will not settle for just saying, oh, well, there's nothing we can do, or, oh, well, as the Premier has said, we can't start supporting failing businesses. That's just bad idea, which, hey, I would agree with. You don't want to just throw money at a losing cause. But I think as an entrepreneur, someone who over the last 7 years has grown my business from zero to a corporation, one thing that I am hardwired to do after all those years is to look at the problems. Just focus on the problems, which, again, I mentioned yesterday. Politicians, especially partisan politics, you can get a reputation for focusing on the problems and being negative. But in order to solve problems, which is really all the government exists to do, it's all a business exists to do as well. What's a problem? I can solve it. In a business, you say, then I can make money. In government, you say, then people's suffering is alleviated. And in this case, I would look at the problems. So over the last few days, this is, by the way, part 5 of number 4, and it is episode 40. Hey, how fitting! We're covering target 4 of episode 40. And the thing that I would do over the last few days is that I've brought up certain problems, challenges for local farmers. So one of the challenges, of course, just aside from farms closing, was startup farms are really having a hard time gaining traction. Okay, it cost a few years ago. A farmer was quoted as saying it cost $25,000 to start a 1 acre of an apple orchard, for example. And so, how can we alleviate the startup costs for farms? There are incentives that we could provide. I'm thinking of, federally, there have been government programs for first-time home buyers, creating tax incentives or tax breaks, that kind of thing to help a specific demographic. So we can target things as a government and say, how do we help new farms start up? Another problem I mentioned was 7 cents of every dollar that a farmer makes it goes into their pockets. So I would want to look at what happens to the other 93 cents. How can we shrink the load of expenses on farmers and get them to take more actually money home. One farmer was quoted in the media saying their major challenge is transportation and getting access to larger markets. And so the transportation piece, can the provincial government create some sort of stimulus for helping farmers get their products to market? Again, whether that's fuel incentive tax breaks or things like that, we would want to start a consensus, identifying those problems and saying, okay, where is the strain? Is it fuel prices? Is it vehicle costs? What is it that is difficult about getting your food to market? I've talked about the food baskets that are a subscription model. They invite people to, it's kind of mandatory, you have to go and pick up your own basket on the farm on Mondays, the farm that I subscribe to. But of course, if they could bring some sort of delivery service or food to market, we could help people who need that food. Everybody who obviously does that has a car or shares the load somehow. But ideally, we would be able to get these fruits and vegetables, these produce boxes, to people who don't have a car. The other thing that farmers said was, of course, getting access to larger markets, getting their food into markets. Because, again, how do you compete with humongous companies that are getting 18,000 more hectares of land and adding and driving the price of food down, so that the smaller local farmers have to also drop their food prices with no support whatsoever to compete with these large farms? And then, of course, maybe they're down to 6 cents or 5 cents in their pockets because there is such little profit to live themselves, right? So you can see, if you play this out, green is not anti-business in any way, but if you play this out to its farthest consequence, you could see how New Brunswick is just filled with a couple of potato companies, a couple blueberry farms, very, very monocultural, and all the rest of the things that we put on our plate, because you're not just eating 2 pounds of blueberries and 2 pounds of potatoes for dinner, right? None of us is doing that. So we need to import everything else. If that is made more locally, then of course everyone is better off for our common good. So I would look at, again, the transportation piece, but then also saying, how can we get to the larger markets? Can we create some sort of regulation where supermarkets need to have a proportion, a certain ratio deferred to local farms, so that they can get into the supermarket shelves? Because I don't know about you, but when I buy in St. Stephen my romaine lettuce in a plastic bag, pre-packaged 3 heads of lettuce, it makes me sad. I really wish that on these produce shelves was local fresh produce that came from a farm nearby. And again, that's a problem that, as I say it, it sounds like it can be solved twice. The transportation, if it's local, then the transportation piece is less, if they don't have to transport their products 500 kilometers, if it's more like 50 kilometers. And then, of course, the larger markets. So one of those larger market pieces, as I've discussed, is the province does spend money on food in nursing homes and hospitals and schools, cafeterias, things like that. We can create incentives to make sure that the food that is offered in those environments is local. The government can do that. So I do hear from my more libertarian friends, the wails of agony about regulating things. But friends, we are doing that already in so many ways. It really is just a matter of the political will and what our government is choosing as a priority and is subsidizing already. So don't think we're not doing this stuff. We're just doing it for mining companies and forestry companies and companies that we prefer. But I argue, as I wrap up this series, and I'm taking way too long, there's nothing more important than food. It is sacred, it is important, and we need it 3 times a day at least. Local fresh produce would be ideal. This probably should have been 2 parts as usual, but thank you so much for joining me for that target number 4. I'm going to turn to, in the coming days, target number 5, which is the public safety piece that I'd like to see in our communities and our role of riding in St. Croix. I will also start unpacking a little bit the history of sales tax in this province and talk about that. So I am getting great feedback in comments and people asking me questions about what they want to see in these videos. And so I do plan to listen to you and make videos that you